right, so here we are. We are with Talia Siegel today, who's a language bird Hebrew teacher. And I'm going to let her introduce herself a little bit, but I understand we're going to talk about some interesting things about Israel, geography, culture, history.
Exactly. So I'll start by introducing myself. So I am Talia Siegel. Right now I live in Lexington, Kentucky. It's been close to 2 years, kind of an unexpected place to end up for me. So I am originally from Israel, but I also grew up in Philadelphia. So I've always been between countries. Also in my early 20s, lived in Europe for a few years. And then I finally settled in Tel Aviv for a while. And because I was in Tel Aviv, I said, okay, I'm going to be here for a while. So let's just go study something. And I said, okay, what do I really love? I love languages. So I decided not to study languages because I've been doing that all my life. And I went for something different. And that was archaeology specifically of Israel. Now, Israel is very rich in archaeology. It goes all the way back from Homo erectus to modern day. And I found it very interesting. I fell in love with it. I was lucky to go on a few digs and really learn hands-on. And through my studies, I noticed that most of the focus was on the biblical eras, which are the Bronze and Iron Age. And we all know a lot about them through the Bible and from all the stories we hear and all of the History Channel shows and the Discovery Channel shows. So we hear a lot about that. So I was fortunate to focus on prehistory because I thought that was interesting because you don't have the written or the spoken word from there. So you're really focusing on material culture and flint tools and skeletons, not human skeletons usually, but animal skeletons, which is also fun. So I thought it was more interesting in a way. So I thought I'd share that with you because it's something that you usually don't hear so much about Israel. So
Okay. I have one question to ask before we get started. So, well, maybe a couple questions. Okay, so I want to know, you said you have a passion for learning languages and that you are Israeli, but also grew up a bit in Philadelphia. And so tell me, what languages do you know, have you learned, and are there any that you hope to study in the future?
Oh, yes. Wow. Okay. So obviously I grew up speaking English and Hebrew. And then in middle school, I started taking French, and I did take it through middle school and high school, to AP level. And also when I was still in high school, I became a little obsessed with German, and I just totally learned that on my own. And that would be probably like my strongest foreign language now. So I still learn German. You always learn the languages you start learning. So I like to read in German. I like German music. I've been to Germany, I don't know how many times already. After German, I became interested in Afrikaans. So I learned that, went to South Africa, spent some time there. And then I also lived in Holland for a few years. So that's kind of like all the same language group, like West Germanic. And then in school, because I did do archaeology, I learned ancient languages like Akkadian and Hittite. So I became pretty proficient at that. Also started learning Latin, and I'm still taking Latin classes now, private classes with a teacher online.
So you know what that's like.
Exactly. And then thinking of signing up for Yiddish this spring semester. And I guess top of my list for future languages would probably be Arabic. I would really like to learn some more, another spoken Semitic language, not just the dead ones.
Yeah. something you could use with other people currently.
Yeah, things like that. So I would like to learn Arabic and Aramaic probably in the future. And I know Lan's still going to take a few years to get really good at. So maybe Greek after Lan. So So that's my language learning history. And this is why I chose something different to study, because I said, all you do is languages. You need to broaden your horizons a little.
Well, this is great. Okay, so let's get back to that. You were going to talk about prehistory. So define for us, what does prehistory mean? Like, what are those years? How is that period defined? Prehistory.
Okay, so great question, actually. For those who aren't clear on that, prehistory is anything that is related to human history before writing.
Okay.
Because once you start writing, then it becomes actual history.
Okay.
Now, you do have those transitional periods between prehistory and history. They're usually called proto-historic, and that usually refers to periods of time where other people are writing in other parts of the world, and writing is just about to get to this part of the world. So that would be like the early Bronze Age in Israel, for example, because we don't really have any text from there, but they're almost there. They're there a short time after.
Okay.
So prehistory is really just from the beginning of time. So in Israel, it's going to be until about, I would say, like the 3rd millennium BC. So Israel is part of the Near East, where writing was born, so to speak, in Mesopotamia and in Egypt. So it was always close, and in between those two big empires that loved to write. So Israel got writing earlier than, let's say, Europe and for sure North America.
For sure.
So,
okay.
So the thing about prehistory is that we usually go farther than just Homo sapiens. We go to the earliest hominins that we have. So we don't go as far back as Africa and Israel, but we're almost there. So we go all the way from Homo erectus to modern day. So that's, I guess, the earliest archaeological sites are from around 1.7 million years ago.
Wow. So you spent some time on these sites in Israel.
Not this one specifically. It's not really open anymore for excavation because it was dug a few decades ago, but some other very early ones, yes.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to put on a different view where we're seeing you, and then I think you're going to share your screen and show us some things as well.
So I'll do that right now, and just some pictures to accompany what I'm going to say. It's not a movie or anything like that. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the geography of Israel and why it's important to prehistory in general, not only Israeli prehistory, but to the significance it has to world history. So we all know that man came from Africa, and most experts agree that it came from the Horn of Africa, which is the area of Ethiopia nowadays. So actually Ethiopia and parts of Israel are part of the Great Rift Valley. It's a geological formation where you have two tectonic plates that are separating here. I think you can see it. Actually, the Red Sea is part of it.
Wow.
So it goes all the way from Africa all the way to Syria. And the part that is in Israel is the Jordan Rift Valley. Now it's this kind of geography and geology that encouraged ancient man to just follow the pathway of the rift, just because it was more easily accessible. You didn't have many barriers, except for maybe the deserts.
Right. Okay.
Back then, they weren't as arid as they are today. So it made it very easy for ancient man just to travel from Ethiopia along the Jordan Rift Valley and up, and then eventually all the way to Europe. So we call this the Levantine corridor, because a corridor usually takes you from one place to another. And the Levant is just the area of Israel and Lebanon. It's the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. So that's where that name comes from. Okay. So
interesting. So early man would follow that path simply because of the geology, the closeness to water, all of that just created sort of a natural path up that way, as opposed to going east or northeast. They traveled in the easiest path.
That was like their gateway to the rest of to Eurasia, so to speak. Wow. So you can see this is a current day topographic map, I guess, of Israel. And you can see the Jordan Rift Valley, and it actually has the lowest place on earth in it. I'm sure some people recognize the Dead Sea over here. So back in the day, this was no Dead Sea. This was a huge sweetwater lake. So the Jordan Rift Valley was almost like a paradise. So it was like a Garden of Eden for ancient man. So it was kind of like a savanna steppe region with sweet water, and you had wildlife of all kinds. You had waterfowl, huge land mammals. I'm talking about like the ancient aurochs, which is a type of huge cow. It's a huge cow. So they fed on those. Yeah, sorry.
A huge cow, like a cow that we have today, but like a different form of it.
Actually, the cow that we have today was domesticated from the auroch. So yes, it's the direct lineage from this. Actually, the last one died in the 1700s in Europe.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So it was a kind of paradise. So speaking of that very ancient site that dates back to 1.7 million years ago, we're going to get to it in a second. That site belongs to the type of hominin that we call Homo erectus. So you see all these different skulls. These are different types of humans that lived in Israel way before the Jews and Palestinians. So if they want to argue about who was there first, it's neither one. So the Homo
well,
erectus,
if one of those guys raises his hand, then I'm sure that they'll all sit down and give up the argument, huh?
if we actually want to make it into a competition, Homo erectus wins because he was there the longest, by far, longer than anyone else. So he was there from about 1.7 million years ago to about 300,000 years ago. So that's quite some time.
Huh.
Yeah, that's a very long time. So he was the first hominin to leave Africa and enter Israel. And this was the first primate that actually walked on two. So it was the first one that walked erect. That's why he's called the Homo erectus.
Got it.
And then we have all of these different versions of ancient man that nobody really knows what they are because they only found a piece here and a piece there. So it's somewhere between Homo erectus and Homo sapien. So we have one that's called like the Galilee man. And you can see he had very pronounced eyebrows.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't really know if he's not completely modern, but he's also not as ancient as Homo erectus.
Okay.
And then, unlike Europe, Homo sapiens came to Israel before the Neanderthals. So Homo sapiens moved in, and then Neanderthals came. They left, they came again, and then they went extinct, as we all know. So that very, very ancient site is called Ubedia. As you can see here, it looks a little arid and dry for the most part. But this is, again, part of the Jordan Rift Valley. So back in the day, this was like a paradise. There were trees everywhere, elephants walking around, huge animals. There was plenty to eat. And especially since they were the first humans there, they had no competition. So this is
was their diet, do you know about their diet? Did they eat a lot of meat or very rarely?
Yes,
they
did, in fact. So Homo erectus, his brain actually grew exponentially from the last hominin that came before him. And most experts, now this is obviously an ongoing argument and discussion, most experts attribute that increase in brain size to eating meat. So the proteins and all the nutrients that came from meat just helped our brain develop, and it got a lot bigger.
All right. Look at all that hair on his back.
I know. I like him.
He's furry. All right.
So what you see here, this is called a hand axe, and this is the main tool of the Homo erectus. This is what he used to do everything. To cut through grass, to hunt, to maybe do other things with that we don't know, probably attack other Homo erectuses walking around. And usually it was made from flint, like everywhere else in the world. But the cool thing about the Jordan Rift Valley is that some of it was volcanic. So it's very unique because they used to make some of these out of basalt, which is like a lava stone, a volcanic rock, which is much, much harder to chip and flake than flint. So this is what it looks like today, but this is the most ancient site of man outside of Africa. So that's pretty cool.
And whereabouts in Israel is it located?
So let's go back to the map. Let's see. It's just about somewhere around here. So it's very close to the Sea of Galilee, or Lake Kinneret. Some people know by that name, or some people know by the place that Jesus walked on water. So it's just south of it. It's right here.
Okay.
Now, when you're looking at these lakes, again, these are just the remnants of the huge lakes that were there before. The huge Great Lakes of the Middle East.
Yes. Okay.
And so again, Homo erectus was there from the dawn of time to about 300,000 years ago. And then later on, we started seeing the old version of Homo sapiens, which is us, pretty much. If looking at the skull, you can see that it's a lot more gracile compared to the ones we were looking at before. Mm-hmm. And these came to Israel, nobody knows for sure, but the earliest dates would be 300,000 years ago. Later dates are about 200,000 years ago. And this is, what you see in the background is just an example of their habitats. So this is a picture of the Carmel Mountains. They're in the north of Israel. They overlook the Mediterranean.
Wow, beautiful.
It is. So even today, you can see that it's rich in vegetation. And up until 100 years ago, it was rich in wildlife as well. But then Israel became so densely populated that they were overhunted and lost their habitats. So this guy, the Homo sapien, was living in and out of caves, traveling around. And later in time, the Neanderthals came down from Europe and started hanging out there as well. So the special thing about the Carmel Mountain caves is that in some of them you can find skeletons of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, like almost contemporaneous to each other. So you can see that there might have been interaction between the two species, there might have not. I think this is the big argument in Europe as well. So it's pretty cool to see that. And I think Israel has a large number of Neanderthal skeletons that were found almost intact as well. So moving up to the later phases of prehistory, right before we started seeing major changes, this is called the Upper Paleolithic area. Paleolithic just means like old Stone Age. So this is another picture of, for example, the Galilee, just this hunter-gatherer paradise that Israel was for these people. So you get this constant stream. You have Neanderthals coming down from Europe. You have more ancient men coming out of Africa, and then it's just this corridor between the north and the south of the old world. The New World was, off limits at that time. Nobody lived there. So you see this hunter-gatherer paradise that Israel really was. So the next period
very
is the
lush and green. But is this is a picture from today, right?
Right.
Okay.
So the picture from today is almost like a simulation, because you still have some areas of Israel that have this kind of climate. But Israel has varying biospheres. So if you go south, it's more desert. But at one point, it was much more lush. Especially at the end of the Ice Age, which we're getting to now.
Okay.
So the end of the last Ice Age was about, I want to say, around 12 to 13 to 15,000 years ago. It depends how you look at it. And now the Ice Age in Israel, we have to understand, was never as bad as in Europe. We never had glaciers, because the closer you are to the equator, the less glacial it is. So it was at this time that we see the Natufian culture, which is actually what kind of got me interested in archaeology. And the Natufians were the last people that were complete hunter-gatherers. They were the first ones that started to give birth to this culture of settling in villages, doing agriculture, domesticating puppies, which is the best part.
Really?
Yes.
Really? Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, so they were the first people who started thinking in a way, if you want to call it modern.
Yeah, so, that resembles how we live in some ways. It's so interesting to me also that you mentioned that they had pets, right? That they wanted to take animals and make them like companions, right?
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. And the dog especially, the dog came before all other animals. So when people doubt the relationship we have with dogs, and I can say, well, sorry, they've been with us for so long. I mean, you can't blame me for wanting puppies all the time.
Right. It's almost innate, right?
It is. I think it is with dogs for sure. I mean, I think other animals as well, but I think dogs have just been there.
I'm laughing because I said innate and my dog's name is Nate. So
really?
punny, Very pun intended.
That's funny. My boyfriend's name is Nate. So there.
Okay. Okay. So they've got that.
And he's also an archaeologist. So.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Right.
So the Natufians were lucky because they lived right at the end of the Ice Age, and then everything just became even better. The world was even nicer to live in, even though Israel, for the most part, was nice during the Ice Age as well because it's closer to the equator. Now it was just amazing. It rained all the time. Everything was blooming. There were so many animals to eat.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, the Natufians decided to settle and to create little villages.
Oh.
And they were actually the earliest people in the world to build in stone. So you can see here that they never really built complete houses out of stone, but they would kind of like carve their way into the terrain here.
Mm-hmm.
And they would build a half circle wall of stones, and then they would kind of build this kind of shack over it with a leather or thatch or wood or whatever they could find in the surrounding area. And then the Natufians are also almost the first ones to use a mano and pestle. So they took ancient grains that were growing and they started grinding them. So they were the first people to make flour.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah.
So they had pets. They started building shelter. They started making. Could I guess sort of into communities? So they started.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, do you think that they were like selective about that? Like who could build their hut next to each other or that kind of thing, and how they were speaking or communicating to each other?
I think they had to be selective because right at the end of the Ice Age, there was kind of a population surge in many parts of the world, Israel included. So these people that were hunter-gatherers that were used to move around like wolves, wolves will have like 1,000 square miles in their territory. So they start kind of like colliding and running into each other and fighting over resources. So
in terms of language, what type of language were they speaking?
So that's a good question. And I love this question because it's one of my favorite topics. What were they speaking?
Yeah.
So no one really knows for sure, but I think the latest research shows that it was probably a language that is the root of all Afro-Asiatic languages, and that's the same broad language group that Semitic languages stem from, so like Arabic and Hebrew, but also ancient Egyptian.
Okay.
So we don't know for sure, and it's really hard to reconstruct something like that, especially with no written word or anything.
Yeah.
But they're basing it today mainly on genetic evidence.
Okay. And so another question I have for you. So, maybe very early settlers like this didn't, but when you mention Egyptian, of course, I think of, hieroglyphics, or I think of, things that they did, which were, I guess, luxuries, or if you had time, right, to do art, or in this case, they created tools, right, which is more advanced, so they had tools to cook or make flour, things like that. But did they have any sort of art or like create anything that was left over that were?
Oh, yes, and that's actually one of the most indicative signs of the Natufian culture. There was a lot of art everywhere. So again, you see a lot more art. Now when people are finally starting to settle, then it kind of frees up time to do other things. And I'm sure we know that art existed before, but not to such an extent. And you were talking about luxury items. Yes, you can see that a lot of Natufian settlers had what we would consider luxury items, such as gemstones and seashells that came from hundreds and thousands of miles away. So you know that there was trade. There was some kind of trade, and people did trade, for example, these cowrie beads for something else that they had. They might have had a really good piece of flint that they traded for green gemstones. And you see that a lot in Natufian burials, for example. So this one specifically doesn't have it, but a lot of Natufian burials will have like a crown of beads on their head.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. It's really cool. So the reason I'm showing you this skeleton is because this girl was buried with her puppy.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see that. Amazing.
So I think this is the earliest non-disputed evidence of dog domestication.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, is it a young girl or a?
I think it's like a juvenile, so like a teenager, something like that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so she was buried in this case with her dog.
Mm-hmm. So
Wow.
we don't know if they killed the dog as a sacrifice or if the dog died naturally and they were buried together.
I see.
But we're definitely seeing a lot of dogs with the Natufians. And now you see why I like them the most, because they love dogs.
Of course. That's
Yeah,
great.
so they're my favorites. And then there was just one last time period that I have to mention because it's our gateway to history. And this is going to be finally actual farmers.
Huh.
And we see them right after the Natufian culture, and it's called the Neolithic or the New Stone Age, that in English. So this is where you actually start seeing farmers. People are actually farming. You can see fields, you can see cultivation of crops, and then finally, domestication of farm animals, because dogs, I told you, dogs and us go way back, that they don't count. But for example, we see cows and sheep and goats and pigs domesticated. So all of the modern food that we actually eat today, this goes all the way back to the Neolithic.
Wow.
So
And what's that picture there on the bottom right?
Okay, great. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the Tower of Jericho.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the Tower of Jericho, and it was built at this time. So a lot of people attribute the first fortifications and whatever, like their form of cities. This is the earliest time that people actually build monumentally. So you could see.
And they built that to protect the city.
Wow, that's the Tower of Jericho. So many PhD dissertations have been written about what it's for. So
really, did I just open up that can of worms?
Yeah.
Huh?
So I don't know if it was really to protect. Some people say it was more of like a spiritual, mystical a tower, because you see there's like a stairwell. If you go up,
yes,
like at a certain time of the year, you can see some kind of like constellation or something like that. So,
so it could have been, maybe people argue for like a religious purpose or some sort of altar.
I think so. Yeah, that would be my best guess based on all the reading I've done.
I see.
Because the interesting thing about it is that there's a tower and there's a wall, but there's only one wall. So the rest is open. So I don't know if it's really for protection.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. So the more we settle and the more people start to farm and exploit their surrounding, like with animals and plant materials, the more you can see the cultic side of things develop and become more spiritual and less tangible. So I think that's really interesting. And then after this, it's already all the time periods we know, the Copper, Bronze, and Iron Age, which are also cool, but I chose to focus on the people that don't have a voice.
Yeah. And so after this, so early farmers, I see from these pictures, right, they had tools, obviously, to farm, and they built shelters and more complex, of course, than the Natufians, right? So they built like these thatched huts, and they had windows and doorways and things like that. And it looks like they were wearing clothes, like they began to wear more clothes. I don't know if in the picture, the illustration of the Natufians, they were smaller in the picture, but I don't know if they were very clothed, but that would, I guess, go along with, them wearing art or jewelry or shells or things like that, spending more time based on like shelter and clothing and different types of foods.
Mm-hmm. So the more people settled, the more they could free up time and leisure to do all those other things, and also they had more kids, because when you move around, it's hard to carry 3 babies, right? So you kind of like check yourself, and you don't have as many babies. But once you're settled down, they start having a lot of kids.
I see.
But the interesting thing about it is that their health, if you look at their bones and their denture and their dental records, they were less healthy.
Really? They were less healthy than what?
Than the Natufians or just all the hunter-gatherers that came before them, because their diet, this is like the people that argue for the keto diet and all that.
Yeah.
They say that eating carbs isn't good. It's not good for your teeth. It rots them. They're not totally wrong about that. I'm not against carbs. I love carbs.
But because their diet changed, and maybe also that they weren't as active, right?
They were very active, but not in the good way. So when you're a hunter-gatherer, I'm not trying to idealize it, even though I kind of do. You're running around hunting animals. Here, you're grinding. If you're a woman, you're on your knees grinding with a stone all day. So you see a lot of pathologies like in their joints, like bad shoulders from grinding, working in the field, things like that. So it's kind of work that let's say our anatomy was not built for. So our health declined, and then you know what happened in the Middle Ages. People weren't that healthy then either. So we're really only getting back on track now.
Some.
But, right? Exactly.
Wow, that's so interesting. That's really cool.
Speaking of dogs.
Right? Speaking of my Nate. Yeah. Well, this has been so awesome. This is a really neat way to see sort of your interests and to share and give you an opportunity to share some things that you studied along with your students or potential maybe future students or just the public in general. These are some things that I just think are really critical to understanding, I guess, the history of Israel and that region as well. So if you're studying the language, it kind of helps to know maybe where certain words or phrases come from as well, and just the history of the place and the land.
Yes, it goes way back, way before all that Bible, and that's also, it says it's a subject in itself which is fascinating. But I mean, we humans have been there for so long, people don't even think about it.
Yeah, no, I would venture to say that there's a lot more to cover on this topic that's just absolutely fascinating. And hopefully maybe we can do like another session sometime on another topic of interest to you,
Sure.
to share some other little bits as well as we go along. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today.
Likewise. Let's do this again. Thanks so much, Talia.
Sure, of course.
Okay.